I never imagined that choosing the wrong shade of beige for my storm windows would almost land me in court. But that's exactly what happened when Patricia Henderson from the HOA decided to make my life a living nightmare. It started on a crisp October morning in 2025, in the planned community of Willow Creek Estates, just outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. I had lived there for 3 years, keeping my head down, and my lawn perfectly manicured according to the 73-page rulebook that governed every aspect of our supposedly peaceful suburban existence. My name is Bradley Morrison, and until that autumn, I thought I had mastered the art of HOA compliance. The previous winter had been brutal. Ice storms had battered the region, and my old wooden frame windows had leaked cold air like sieves, driving my heating bills through the roof. When spring finally arrived, I decided enough was enough. I researched storm windows obsessively, reading reviews and comparing specifications until my wife threatened to hide my laptop. Eventually, I found a company called Nordic Shield Solutions, a small manufacturer based in Minnesota that specialized in energy-efficient storm windows with a proprietary coating that reflected UV rays while maintaining crystal clarity. The windows were expensive, nearly twice the cost of standard storm windows, but the energy savings and durability made them worth it. The color options were limited. Nordic Shield only offered their windows in 3 shades: Arctic White, Glacier Gray, and Desert Sand. I studied the HOA guidelines carefully. The relevant section stated that storm windows must be neutral earth tones that complement the existing structure and maintain neighborhood aesthetic harmony. My house had tan siding with cream trim, so desert sand seemed like the obvious choice. I filled out the architectural modification request form, attached photos of my house, included the manufacturer's specifications with the desert sand color sample, and submitted everything to the HOA board in early May. 6 weeks passed without a response, which according to the bylaws meant automatic approval. I ordered the windows in late June, and the installation crew came out in mid-July during a scorching heat wave. The installers were professionals, finishing the entire job in 2 days. When they were done, my house looked fantastic. The desert sand color was maybe 1 shade lighter than I had anticipated from the sample, catching the sunlight in a way that gave it an almost golden quality, but it complemented my siding perfectly. My neighbor, Robert Chen, came over to admire the work and asked for the company's contact information. Even the mailman commented on how sharp the house looked. I should have known the piece wouldn't last. 3 weeks after installation, on a Thursday afternoon when I was working from home, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Patricia Henderson standing on my porch, clipboard in hand, her face pinched into an expression of profound disapproval. Patricia was the HOA board president, a position she had held for 7 consecutive years through a combination of relentless campaigning and the fact that nobody else wanted to deal with the constant drama. She was 52 years old, drove a white Lexus SUV with vanity plates that read HOA, and had made it her personal mission to ensure that Willow Creek Estates maintained what she called premium residential standards. "Mr. Morrison," she said, her voice dripping with false politeness, "we need to discuss your windows." "Good afternoon, Patricia," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "What about them?" She gestured dramatically at my house as if it were covered in graffiti instead of perfectly good storm windows. "Those windows are not the approved color. They're far too light, almost yellow in certain lighting. They violate Section 12, Paragraph 4 of the Community Guidelines." I felt my jaw tighten but forced myself to remain calm. I submitted an architectural modification request in May with the exact color specifications. I never received a rejection, which means it was automatically approved per the bylaws. Patricia's eyes narrowed. I have no record of any such submission. Then there's a problem with your record keeping, I said, because I have the certified mail receipt showing it was delivered to the HOA office on May 7th at 10:15 in the morning. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Regardless of any alleged submission, those windows are clearly not acceptable. They stand out too much. Several neighbors have complained. Which neighbors? I asked. That information is confidential. Of course it is. I crossed my arms. Patricia, my submission was timely and complete. The windows meet all the stated requirements. They're neutral earth tones that complement my house. If you had an issue with the specific shade, you had 6 weeks to reject my application. We're rejecting it now, she snapped, dropping the pretense of civility. You have 30 days to remove those windows and replace them with something appropriate, or we'll begin fining you $500 per day. My heart rate spiked. $500 per day. That's insane. It's in the bylaws, Section 21. Willful aesthetic violations. She thrust a printed notice at me. This is your official warning. The clock starts today. She turned on her heel and marched back to her Lexus, leaving me standing in the doorway with a piece of paper that threatened to drain my bank account faster than a Vegas gambling addiction. That evening, I spread all my documentation across the dining room table. The architectural modification request form, the certified mail receipt, photos of the color sample, the HOA bylaws. My wife, Jennifer, sat across from me, her face tight with worry. Can they really fine us $500 a day? She asked. They can try, I said, but they're going to have a fight on their hands. I drafted a formal response, citing every relevant section of the bylaws, attaching copies of my original submission and the automatic approval clause. I sent it via email and certified mail to the HOA board, copying all 5 members individually. Then I did something that would prove crucial later. I posted about the situation in the Willow Creek Estates community Facebook group, asking if anyone else had experienced issues with Patricia rejecting properly submitted modification requests. The response was overwhelming. Within 2 hours, 37 residents had commented with their own horror stories. Margaret Sullivan had been threatened with fines for planting rose bushes that were too pink. Dave and Linda Torres had been cited for having a mailbox that was excessively decorative, despite it being identical to the one Patricia herself had installed the previous year. Someone named Thomas Wright had actually been taken to court over the color of his shutters, spending $12,000 in legal fees before the judge threw out the HOA's case with prejudice. The Facebook post caught fire. By the next morning, it had been shared to 3 other local community groups and had attracted the attention of a reporter from the Charlotte Observer named Kevin Brandt. He sent me a direct message asking if I would be willing to discuss HOA overreach for an article he was working on. Meanwhile, Patricia was not sitting idle. On Friday morning, I received an email from the HOA's attorney, a lawyer named Gregory Walsh from a firm called Walsh and Associates. The email was a masterclass in legal intimidation, full of phrases like material breach of covenant obligations and injunctive relief and recovery of legal costs. The thrust of the message was clear: remove the windows or face a lawsuit. I forwarded the email to a friend of mine, Marcus Chen, who was a real estate attorney practicing in downtown Charlotte. We had met at a neighborhood barbecue 2 years earlier and had stayed in touch. Marcus read through everything I sent him and called me back within an hour. "This is complete garbage," he said bluntly. "You followed the process to the letter. The automatic approval clause is crystal clear. Patricia's just mad because she dropped the ball and didn't review your submission in time." "So what do?" I asked. "First, don't remove those windows. Second, I'm going to send Walsh a response that will make him think twice about filing anything. Third, document everything. Every interaction, every email, every conversation. If this goes to court, we're going to bury them." Marcus drafted a response that was polite but firm, laying out the timeline of events, and making it clear that any legal action by the HOA would likely result in them paying my attorney's fees under North Carolina's laws regarding frivolous litigation. He also pointed out that the HOA board had a fiduciary duty to act in the best interests of all homeowners, not to pursue personal vendettas. The weekend passed in tense silence. I kept waiting for another threatening letter, another visit from Patricia, but nothing came. On Monday, the Charlotte Observer published Kevin Brandt's article. The headline read, "Storm Windows Become Storm of Controversy in Charlotte Suburb." The piece detailed my situation and included quotes from several other Willow Creek residents about Patricia's aggressive enforcement tactics. It also included a response from Patricia herself, who claimed she was simply upholding community standards and that I was being deliberately difficult. The article went viral locally. By Tuesday morning, it had been picked up by 2 Charlotte television stations. A camera crew from WCNC showed up at my house that afternoon, asking for an interview. I politely declined, not wanting to escalate things further, but they filmed my house from the street anyway. On the 6 o'clock news, the anchor introduced the segment with a teaser. One man's home improvement project becomes an HOA nightmare, the story you need to see if you live in a planned community. The publicity forced the HOA board to hold an emergency meeting on Wednesday evening. According to the bylaws, homeowners had the right to attend and speak during the public comment period. I showed up with Marcus and found the community center packed with residents, many of whom I had never seen at an HOA meeting before. Patricia sat at the head table with the other 4 board members: Donald Pierce, the vice president, Susan Young, the treasurer, Frank Robertson, the secretary, and Angela Morrison, no relation to me, the at-large member. Patricia looked deeply unhappy about the crowd size. When the public comment period opened, 23 people signed up to speak. One by one, residents stood and shared their experiences with what many called Patricia's reign of terror. The stories were astonishing. She had rejected a playground set for being too colorful, even though it met all safety requirements and was in the backyard, invisible from the street. She had demanded that a veteran remove a small flagpole from his front yard, claiming it violated the no permanent decorative structures rule, despite flags being explicitly exempt. She had threatened to fine a widow for having a lawn service that, in Patricia's opinion, didn't edge the sidewalks precisely enough. When my turn came, I calmly presented my timeline, showing the certified mail receipt, the architectural modification request, the specifications, and the photos. I explained that I had followed every rule, met every requirement, and received no response within the mandated time frame. "I'm not here to cause problems," I said, addressing the entire board. "I just want to live in my home without being harassed for making a legitimate improvement. These windows are saving me hundreds of dollars in energy costs. They look great. They harm nobody, and according to your own bylaws, they were automatically approved." Patricia interrupted. "The color is clearly too light, Patricia." Donald Pierce cut her off, his voice sharp. "I've reviewed Mr. Morrison's submission. It was properly filed and meets all requirements. We never formally rejected it. He's right about the automatic approval." Patricia's face turned red. "But the aesthetics are subjective," Susan Young interjected. "And the guidelines are written to be objective. Desert sand is listed as an acceptable earth tone by multiple manufacturers. We can't retroactively reject something we approved by our own inaction." The board voted 4-1 to officially approve my storm windows. Only Patricia voted no, and she looked absolutely furious about it. The crowd applauded. As people filed out of the community center, at least a dozen residents came up to thank me for standing up to Patricia. But Patricia Henderson was not the type of person who accepted defeat gracefully. Over the next 2 weeks, I noticed a pattern. My trash cans, which I always brought in before noon on collection day per the rules, were suddenly being cited for being out too long, even when I had doorbell camera footage proving they were put away on time. I received a violation notice for excessive noise on a Saturday afternoon when I was mowing my lawn at 2 p.m., well within the allowed hours. Another notice claimed my mailbox was crooked, which it wasn't. Patricia was retaliating, and she was being obvious about it. I wasn't the only target. Other residents who had spoken at the meeting or supported me on Facebook started receiving spurious violations. Margaret Sullivan got cited for her roses again. Dave Torres received a notice about his mailbox being slightly faded and requiring repainting. The community Facebook group exploded with anger. Then, on a Saturday morning in mid-September, things took an unexpected turn. A massive thunderstorm rolled through Charlotte, bringing heavy rain, damaging winds, and even a few small tornadoes in the surrounding counties. I spent the afternoon in my basement with Jennifer, listening to the weather radio and hoping our roof would hold. When the storm finally passed and we emerged, the neighborhood looked like it had been through a war. Trees were down everywhere. Shingles littered the streets. Fences had blown over. And everywhere I looked, I saw broken windows. The storm had been particularly brutal on older windows. The high winds had driven rain and small debris into window frames throughout the neighborhood, shattering glass and cracking frames. My Nordic Shield storm windows, however, had performed flawlessly. Not a crack, not even a rattle. They had protected my original windows completely. As I walked around surveying the damage, Robert Chen came jogging over. "Bradley, your windows made it through?" "Yeah, they're tough," I said. "How did yours fare?" he grimaced. 3 broken on the south side. Water damage in my living room. It's going to be expensive." All up and down the street, the story was the same. Broken windows, water damage, emergency calls to contractors and insurance companies. The community Facebook group transformed from an HOA complaint forum to a disaster response network, with people sharing recommendations for repair services and comparing insurance coverage. And then I got the call. My phone rang Sunday afternoon. The number was Patricia Henderson's. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hello, Mr. Morrison." Her voice sounded strained, lacking its usual imperious tone. "This is Patricia Henderson." "I know. What can I do for you, Patricia?" There was a long pause. "I noticed your windows survived the storm." "They did. They're very well made." Another pause. "Where? Where did you purchase them?" I almost laughed. This was the same woman who had threatened to fine me $500 a day for those very windows. "They're from a company called Nordic Shield Solutions, based in Minnesota." "Why do you ask?" "I had 14 windows break yesterday," she said, and I could hear the defeat in her voice. "The contractor I called said it could be 3 weeks before they can even come out for an estimate. My living room and 2 bedrooms are boarded up. I need replacements quickly." The irony was so thick I could taste it. "I see. Well, Nordic Shield has a website you can order directly from them. I looked them up after you mentioned the name. They have very limited color options. Yes, they do. Arctic white, glacier gray, and desert sand. The desert sand, she said quietly. Would that work with cream-colored siding? I bit back a dozen sarcastic responses. Yes, Patricia. It would work beautifully with cream-colored siding. It works beautifully with tan siding too. That's why I chose it. The line went silent for a moment. Mr. Morrison, I owe you an apology. Those were words I never expected to hear from Patricia Henderson. Go on. I was wrong about your windows. I was wrong about a lot of things. I've been so focused on maintaining control, on enforcing every little rule, that I lost sight of what an HOA is supposed to do. We're supposed to protect property values and maintain community standards, but we're also supposed to be reasonable. I wasn't reasonable with you. It was the most self-aware thing I had ever heard Patricia say, and I suspected the boarded-up windows in her living room had a lot to do with her sudden clarity. I appreciate you saying that. Would you be willing to send me the contact information for Nordic Shield? And maybe some advice on which model you chose. Sure, I said. I'll email you everything this afternoon. Thank you, she hesitated. And Mr. Morrison, I'll be recommending at the next board meeting that we update our window guidelines to specifically approve Nordic Shield products. It's clear they're superior to standard options. After we hung up, Jennifer looked at me with raised eyebrows. Did Patricia Henderson just apologize to you? She did, and asked where I bought the windows she tried to force me to remove. Jennifer shook her head in disbelief. Will wonders never cease? I sent Patricia a detailed email that afternoon with Nordic Shield's website, the specific model I had ordered, installation tips, and even the contact information for my installation crew. Part of me felt petty for helping her, but a larger part recognized that this might be an opportunity to actually improve things in Willow Creek Estates. The next few weeks were chaotic for everyone. The storm had damaged over 100 homes in our development, and contractors were booked solid. Insurance adjusters crawled over the neighborhood like ants. Emergency board meetings were held to discuss assessment options for repairing common areas. In all the chaos, the issue of my windows faded into the background, becoming just another piece of old business that nobody cared about anymore. Patricia did order windows from Nordic Shield, and she wasn't alone. After seeing how well my windows had performed, 17 other families in the development placed orders. Robert Chen ordered them. Margaret Sullivan ordered them. Even Donald Pierce, the board vice president, ordered a full set for his house. Nordic Shield suddenly had a rush of orders from North Carolina, and the company's sales representative called me to ask what had happened. Word of mouth, I explained. Your product proved itself during a major storm. Well, we appreciate the business, she said. And if you're ever interested in being a regional sales representative, let us know. You've clearly got a knack for it. I laughed and declined, but it was flattering nonetheless. Patricia's windows were installed in early October, about a week before mine had been installed the previous year. I saw the installation crew working and walked over to take a look. The desert sand color looked perfect against her cream siding, just as I knew it would. Patricia came out while I was standing there, and for a moment we just looked at each other awkwardly. They look good, I finally said. They do, she agreed. Thank you for the recommendation. You're welcome. She took a breath. The board is meeting next Thursday to vote on several guideline updates. We're going to formally add Nordic Shield to the approved vendors list and expand the color options for storm windows. We're also going to revise the automatic approval timeline and create a clearer appeals process. I'd like you to attend if you're willing. Your input would be valuable. This was a complete 180 from the woman who had stood on my porch 3 months earlier threatening $1,000 daily fines. I'll be there. The Thursday meeting was surprisingly productive. The board approved the window guideline changes unanimously. They also voted to establish a formal review process for any homeowner dispute, requiring documented evidence and a majority board vote before fines could be assessed. Patricia even proposed reducing her own authority as president, distributing some responsibilities to other board members to prevent any single person from wielding too much power. During the public comment period, I stood and addressed the board. I want to say that I appreciate the changes being made tonight. HOAs get a bad reputation because they sometimes prioritize rigid rule enforcement over common sense and community well-being. What happened with my windows was frustrating, but the fact that the board has listened to residents and made meaningful reforms gives me hope that Willow Creek Estates can be a better place to live. I'm willing to move forward and put this behind us. Several people applauded. Patricia gave me a small nod of acknowledgement. But while the HOA situation was resolving itself, something else was developing that would bring the whole story full circle in a way I never anticipated. In late October, I received a phone call from a man named Detective Ryan Foster with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. He asked if I would be willing to meet with him regarding Patricia Henderson and the Willow Creek Estates HOA. My stomach dropped. Had Patricia done something criminal? Had she retaliated against someone more severely than I knew about? I met Detective Foster at a coffee shop near my office the next afternoon. He was a man in his mid-40s with graying hair and a serious demeanor. He pulled out a notebook and recorder, asking permission to record our conversation. I agreed. "Mr. Morrison, I'm investigating allegations of financial misconduct by the Willow Creek Estates HOA board," he said. "Specifically, allegations that Patricia Henderson has been misappropriating funds over the past several years. Your name came up in our investigation because of your recent dispute with the HOA." I was stunned. Financial misconduct? What kind of misconduct? "That's what we're trying to determine. We've received information suggesting that fine money collected from homeowners has not been properly deposited into HOA accounts. We're also looking into whether vendors may have been overcharged for services, with kickbacks going to board members." He asked me detailed questions about my interactions with Patricia, the fine threats, the legal fees the HOA had threatened to pursue. I answered everything honestly, providing copies of all the documents I had saved. The conversation lasted nearly 2 hours. "One more thing," Detective Foster said as we were wrapping up. "You mentioned that the HOA hired an attorney named Gregory Walsh. Did you ever pay any legal fees to the HOA?" "No. They threatened to pursue legal fees if I didn't comply, but it never got that far. The board voted to approve my windows, and the whole thing was dropped." He made a note. "Did Patricia Henderson ever mention how much the HOA was spending on legal fees to pursue your case?" I thought back. "She didn't specifically say, but the letter from Walsh mentioned that I would be responsible for all legal costs incurred, which implied they were racking up bills." Detective Foster nodded grimly. "Thank you, Mr. Morrison. You've been very helpful." After he left, I immediately called Marcus Chen and told him about the meeting. Marcus was intrigued. "Financial misconduct in HOAs is more common than people realize," he said. "Board members have access to significant funds and sometimes limited oversight. If Patricia has been skimming money or taking kickbacks, that's embezzlement. That's serious criminal charges." The investigation became public knowledge in early November when the Charlotte Observer published another article, this time with the headline, "Willow Creek, HOA President Under Investigation for Embezzlement." The story reported that police were examining financial records going back 5 years, and that multiple homeowners had come forward with complaints about excessive fines and questionable expenses. The Facebook group went absolutely insane. Residents started digging through old HOA financial statements, which were technically public record but which nobody had ever bothered to examine closely. People discovered all sorts of irregularities, large payments to vendors nobody had heard of, legal expenses that seemed wildly inflated, fine revenue that didn't match up with the violations that had been issued. The HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted to place Patricia on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. Donald Pierce took over as acting president. The board also hired an independent forensic accountant to audit all HOA finances. In December, the audit results were devastating. The forensic accountant found that Patricia had embezzled approximately $218,000 over a 4-year period through various schemes. She had created fake vendors and submitted invoices for services that were never performed, then deposited the checks into accounts she controlled. She had collected fine money from homeowners, but never deposited it into the HOA account, pocketing the cash instead. She had inflated legal expenses, working out a kickback arrangement with Gregory Walsh where he would bill the HOA for unnecessary work, and split the proceeds with Patricia. The scheme with Walsh was particularly egregious. The audit found that he had billed the HOA over $70,000 for legal work related to my storm windows alone, even though the case never went to court and required minimal actual legal effort. Walsh had submitted bills for research, document preparation, court filing fees that were never incurred, and numerous phone conferences that never happened. Patricia had approved all the payments, and Walsh had been sending her cashier's checks for 50% of the billings. On December 18th, Patricia Henderson was arrested at her home and charged with embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Gregory Walsh was arrested the same day on similar charges. Both were released on bond, but the damage was done. The story made regional news, with reporters camping out in Willow Creek estates to interview shocked residents. I was conflicted about the whole situation. Yes, Patricia had made my life miserable for a few months. Yes, she had been petty and vindictive and had abused her authority. But I had also seen her moment of genuine remorse and self-reflection after the storm. I had seen her try to make amends and reform the HOA's practices. The Patricia Henderson who had apologized to me seemed like a different person from the one who had been systematically stealing from her neighbors for years. Jennifer and I discussed it one evening over dinner. "Do you feel bad for her?" she asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "I feel bad that someone could become so twisted that they'd steal from their own community. But she made her choices. She had countless opportunities to stop, and she didn't." The legal process moved forward into the new year. In January 2026, Patricia and Walsh both pleaded guilty to embezzlement and fraud charges as part of plea agreements. Patricia was sentenced to 4 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution of $218,000 to the HOA. Walsh was sentenced to 3 years and disbarred from practicing law in North Carolina. Both sentences were more severe than they might have been because the judge was particularly disgusted by the betrayal of community trust. At Patricia's sentencing hearing, which I attended out of morbid curiosity, she made a brief statement. "I let my need for control turn into something terrible," she said, her voice shaking. I convinced myself that I was entitled to the money because of all the work I did for the community. I rationalized every theft. I'm deeply ashamed and I'm sorry. The judge was unmoved. Miss Henderson, you held a position of trust and you betrayed that trust systematically and deliberately. You didn't just steal money. You stole your neighbor's sense of security and community. Your actions have damaged people who trusted you. The sentence stands. After the sentencing, the Willow Creek Estates HOA board held a community-wide meeting to discuss moving forward. Donald Pierce, who had been formally elected as the new president, announced that the HOA would be implementing numerous reforms. Mandatory financial audits every year, term limits for board members, transparency requirements for all expenses over $500, and a resident oversight committee with the authority to review board decisions. "We failed you," Donald said, addressing the packed community center. "We should have been paying attention to the finances. We should have questioned things that didn't make sense. We gave one person too much power and didn't provide adequate oversight. That will never happen again." The meeting ended with a vote to assess each homeowner an additional $300 to cover the shortfall caused by Patricia's theft, since full restitution would take years, and the HOA needed operating capital. Nobody was happy about it, but everyone understood the necessity. As for me, my Nordic Shield storm windows became something of a local legend. Not only had they survived the September storm without a scratch, but they had also inadvertently exposed Patricia's embezzlement scheme. If I had simply removed the windows when Patricia first demanded it, the whole chain of events might never have happened. The publicity from my dispute had drawn attention to the HOA's practices, which had prompted residents to start examining financial records, which had led to the discovery of the fraud. By February, nearly half the homes in Willow Creek Estates had installed Nordic Shield windows. The company sent me a thank you gift basket and a plaque reading Nordic Shield Ambassador, which I hung in my garage as a conversation piece. My energy bills remained low. My house stayed comfortable in all weather, and I never had another problem with the HOA. Robert Chen, who had become a good friend through the whole ordeal, came over for beers one Saturday evening in March. We sat on my back deck, enjoying the early spring weather. "You know what the craziest part of this whole thing is?" he said. "What's that?" "If Patricia had just approved your windows in the first place, she'd probably still be embezzling money and nobody would have caught her for years." I laughed. "Yeah, I've thought about that. She could have let it go." But she was so focused on asserting control, on proving she was in charge, that she turned a non-issue into a major controversy. And the controversy led to scrutiny, and scrutiny led to her downfall. "Pride before the fall," Robert said, raising his beer bottle. "Pride before the fall," I echoed, clinking my bottle against his. The rest of 2026 passed peacefully. The HOA, under Donald's leadership, became dramatically more reasonable and transparent. The quarterly financial reports were detailed and clear. Board meetings became productive discussions rather than Patricia's personal fiefdom. Architectural modification requests were reviewed promptly and fairly. Violations were issued only for genuine problems, not petty grievances. I was even asked to join the newly formed Resident Oversight Committee, and after some consideration, I accepted. It was only a few hours per month, and it felt like a way to ensure that the reform stuck, that Willow Creek Estates would never again fall under the control of someone who valued power over community. In September, 1 year after the storm that had tested my windows and exposed Patricia's crimes, the HOA held a community barbecue. It was the first social event the neighborhood had held in years that wasn't tense or awkward. People actually seemed happy to be there, talking and laughing, their kids running around playing tag while adults grilled burgers and compared notes on whose lawn looked best. Jennifer and I were standing near the grills when Donald approached with Susan Young and a couple I didn't recognize. "Bradley, Jennifer, I want you to meet Tom and Rachel Peterson," Donald said. "They just closed on the house on Maple Street. Tom, Rachel, this is Bradley Morrison. He's the one I was telling you about." "The window guy," Tom said, grinning and shaking my hand enthusiastically. "Our realtor told us the whole story, said it's part of the neighborhood lore now." "That's probably overstating things," I said, embarrassed. "Are you kidding?" Rachel said. "We almost didn't buy in an HOA community because we've heard so many horror stories. But when we heard how you stood up to the board, and how the community actually made real changes afterward, it convinced us this was a place where people care about doing things right." We chatted with the Petersons for a while, answering their questions about the neighborhood and welcoming them to Willow Creek Estates. After they wandered off to meet other neighbors, Jennifer squeezed my hand. "You did a good thing," she said quietly. "Not just for us, but for everyone here." "I just wanted to keep my windows," I protested. "You wanted to stand up for what was right," she corrected. "And you did, and it mattered." Looking around at the peaceful scene, at neighbors who actually seemed to enjoy each other's company, at a community that had faced its problems and emerged stronger, I had to admit she had a point. What had started as a simple home improvement project had turned into a nightmare of HOA threats and legal intimidation. But in the end, it had exposed corruption, led to meaningful reforms, and reminded everyone involved that communities work best when people treat each other with respect and common sense. My Nordic Shield storm windows were still going strong, keeping my house comfortable and my energy bills low. They had withstood major storms, protected my home, and somehow become the unlikely catalyst for positive change in Willow Creek Estates. Every time I looked at them, I felt a mix of vindication and amusement. Patricia Henderson had threatened me with crippling fines over the color of those windows, had harassed me with spurious violations, had tried to bully me into compliance. And then, when disaster struck and she needed help, she had called me to ask where I bought them. The irony would never stop being surreal, but beyond the irony there was a larger lesson about power, community, and accountability. HOAs exist, in theory, to maintain property values and community standards. But when the people running them forget that they are servants of the community, not rulers of it, when they prioritize control over common sense and personal agendas over collective good, they become toxic. The only antidote is vigilance, transparency, and the willingness of residents to speak up when something is wrong. I never sought to become the guy who took on the HOA. I just wanted energy-efficient windows in an appropriate color. But sometimes standing up for something small and reasonable becomes standing up for something larger and more important. Sometimes refusing to be bullied matters more than you realize. As the barbecue continued into the evening, with string lights twinkling overhead and the sound of laughter filling the air, I felt genuinely grateful. Grateful for the windows that had worked exactly as advertised. Grateful for the community that had supported me when I needed it. Grateful for the reforms that had made Willow Creek Estates a better place to live. And yes, even grateful for Patricia's moment of crisis and contrition, which had shown that even people who do terrible things can have moments of clarity and self-awareness, even if those moments come too late to undo the damage they've caused. In the end, the story of my storm windows became the story of my neighborhood's transformation. It became a reminder that individuals can make a difference, that communities can change for the better, and that sometimes the smallest battles reveal the largest truths. Patricia Henderson went to prison for her crimes, paying the price for years of corruption and betrayal. Gregory Walsh lost his law license and his freedom. The HOA implemented comprehensive reforms, and I got to keep my desert sand-colored Nordic Shield storm windows, which still looked absolutely perfect against my tan siding. It wasn't the outcome anyone could have predicted when I submitted that architectural modification request back in May 2025. But it was, ultimately, the outcome that was right. Justice was served, reforms were made, and a community learned valuable lessons about governance, oversight, and the importance of questioning authority when authority stops serving the people it's supposed to protect. And whenever new residents moved into Willow Creek Estates and asked about the neighborhood, someone inevitably told them the story of the HOA president who threatened a homeowner over window colors and ended up in federal prison for embezzlement. It became a cautionary tale, a reminder, and oddly enough, a source of pride. We were the neighborhood that had faced corruption and fixed it. We were the community that had reformed itself from within. As for Nordic Shield Solutions, they sent me a nice thank you card every year on the anniversary of my purchase, along with a small discount code I usually passed along to neighbors. The company had expanded their color options to include 5 new shades, all named after various geographic features. I sometimes wondered if the desert sand shade had received a boost in popularity because of my story, if there were homeowners across the country installing storm windows and telling their own tales of HOA conflicts. Life in Willow Creek Estates settled into a comfortable rhythm. The quarterly HOA meetings were well attended but brief and productive. The financial reports showed healthy reserves and responsible spending. Donald Pierce proved to be an excellent president, delegating effectively and listening to resident concerns. The oversight committee I served on met monthly and had yet to find any serious problems, which was exactly how it should be. My lawn remained meticulously maintained, not because I feared HOA violations, but because I genuinely enjoyed the work. My house stayed comfortable year-round thanks to those controversial windows. Jennifer and I hosted the Petersons for dinner one evening, and Tom asked if I ever regretted not backing down when Patricia first threatened me. Never, I said without hesitation. I was right. The windows met all the guidelines. Backing down would have meant accepting that being bullied is the price of a peaceful life. It would have meant letting Patricia continue her pattern of targeting anyone who didn't immediately submit to her authority. Someone needed to stand up to her, and it happened to be me. But you couldn't have known about the embezzlement, Rachel pointed out. No, I agreed. That was a surprise to everyone, but that's the thing about standing up to abuses of power. You never know what you might uncover. Sometimes a bully is just a bully. Sometimes they're also a criminal. Either way, they need to be confronted. As the evening wound down and the Petersons headed home, I stood on my front porch and looked at my house. The desert sand storm windows caught the last rays of sunset, glowing softly in the fading light. They were beautiful, functional, and completely appropriate for my tan-sided home with cream trim. They were exactly what I had wanted when I started this whole process. The fact that they had survived the storm exposed embezzlement and ultimately helped reform an entire HOA was just an unexpected bonus. Sometimes doing the right thing for the right reasons leads to outcomes far beyond what you imagined. Sometimes standing firm on principle matters more than keeping the peace. And sometimes the windows you install to save money on heating bills end up saving an entire community from a corrupt leader. I went inside, where Jennifer was loading the dishwasher. "Good evening," she asked. "Very good," I said. "I was just thinking about how strange life can be, how one decision can ripple out in ways you never expect." She smiled. "Are we still talking about windows?" "We're always talking about windows," I said, and we both laughed. Because in the end, that's what the whole story came down to. Windows. Storm windows in desert sand color, manufactured by a small company in Minnesota. Installed by professionals in July 2025. Threatened by an HOA president in August. Defended through September. Vindicated in October, and admired ever since. They were just windows, but they represented something more. The principle that rules should be applied fairly, that power should be exercised reasonably, and that sometimes the most ordinary acts of home ownership can become extraordinary tests of character and community. The windows are still there, still protecting my home, still looking perfect against the siding. They'll probably outlast my ownership of the house, serving whoever buys it after Jennifer and I eventually move on. And maybe the next owners will hear the story of the HOA president who tried to fine me for installing them, who later asked where to buy them, and who ultimately went to prison for crimes that were exposed because I refused to be intimidated. It's a good story. It's a true story. And every time I look at those desert sand-colored storm windows catching the North Carolina sunlight, I'm reminded that standing up for what's right, even in something as mundane as a home improvement dispute, can matter more than you ever imagined possible.